Great. Welcome everyone to today's seminar, Unlocking Innovative Research Techniques, Exploring Computational Analysis Potential in International Studies. As we all know, new technologies don't just transform the world around us, they also reshape the tools we use to conduct our research. These advancements offer groundbreaking opportunities to revolutionize research methodologies in our field. From data analytics to machine learning, these innovations provide scholars with powerful new tools to address complex global issues with unprecedented depth and precision. I want to be honest with you, I'm thrilled to host Professor Akın Ünver with us today because he's a pioneer in the field. He's an expert in conflict research, computational methods, and digital crisis communication. Professor Ünver has led the way in applying these technologies to international studies. He coordinates European research projects. He has worked at the Oxford University before and the Alan Turing Institute. I'm sure he's uniquely positioned to guide us through the immense potential of computational analysis in reshaping our research practices. I want to say that we've chosen a Zoom meeting format for this event to make the discussion more direct, especially during the Q&A session. I encourage you to engage with Professor Ünver today and ask questions. But please keep your microphones and cameras turned off during the talk. Akın, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Pedi. Thank you also so much for the invitation and a chance to, give me a chance to express what I feel is happening with international relations and emerging methodologies. If you were to ask 10 scholars to give this seminar, probably you would get 10 very different presentations because the field is exploding so rapidly that each, I think, scholar is focusing on the aspects of these new technologies in a way that reinforces their existing interests. Can we get microphones? Okay. So the background that I have, which infers my understanding of computational social science, social data science, or new emerging methods, techniques, technologies, and their impact on international relations research comes from the fact that I'm primarily involved in war conflicts, peace dynamics. But over the last 10 years, I supervised PhD thesis, master's thesis of students both in Turkey and in Europe who want to focus on different dimensions of social data science, being diplomacy, international institutions, international trade. So this presentation that I'm going to do today is built on a combination of those experiences. And if time allows, I'm going to also explain two recent research projects that I have to give you an idea on how these ideas materialize in actual research setting. So if I'd like to start from a position of those who might be newcomers to this field. So there are specific ways of calling what we are doing. So computational social science, or CSS, is one of those. Computational social science, social data science, new media studies, and social computation. These terminologies are very confusing, but roughly they converge on similar methods or similar theoretical backgrounds. There are really no clear-cut and commonly agreed upon separations between what constitutes a computational social science project versus how it differs from a social data science project, how it differs from new media studies project, and so on. So usually different universities, different scientific cultures refer to these things as either computational social science or social data science, or new media studies, which is an older conceptualization, or social computation. The reason perhaps why we needed this new field is that, one, our problems as human beings are becoming increasingly more complex, both in terms of our adaptation of digital communication technologies. We all now have smartphones, which we didn't have 30 years ago. All of us have email addresses, which most of us didn't have 30 years ago. Almost all of us have at least one social media account. Most of us didn't have that 20 years ago. And we are being run by governments who are increasingly more dominant on in digital field, on social media, as a result of which you have these increasing political interactions on digital space, for which old methods are becoming increasingly less powerful or less capable to deal with. So the reason why we are pursuing these new methods is that newer methods give us more power, more explanatory capability to deal with larger scale of data. And in this, we have diverse disciplines integrating. So sociology integrating with political science, that integrating with computer science, management information systems integrating with psychology. So suddenly we have this kind of large interdisciplinarity that we didn't really have 20 or 30 years ago. So we are combining methods, we're combining disciplines, and we are increasingly deal with enormous amounts of human digital trace data, for which we need more interdisciplinarity, but also new tools, essentially. And with regard to political information, we also have new types of data. Political parties tweet, Trump tweets, embassies share Instagram posts, international organizations post LinkedIn posts. They interact with each other. They like, share, criticize. We increasingly have this importance of technology companies becoming the wealthiest companies in the world. You have Tesla, you have Meta, you have Amazon, you have Alphabet, Google, who are becoming increasingly more and more dominant in our daily lives, evidenced perhaps by the fact that now they are among the top 10 wealthiest companies in the world. So suddenly, us as a humanity have altered our way of interacting with each other. We also have altered our way of interacting with our governments, with our embassies, and those embassies and governments in turn have altered the way in which they interact with each other. So the research methods that we follow to study those new phenomena are actually not very new. All the way back into 1970s, we have Mark Granovetter, The Strength of Weak Ties article, which from a network analysis point of view, really created this field. But in terms of computational social science emerging as a new field, really starts with this 2009 article by David Lazar and other leading figures in the field, who wrote this article in Science called Computational Social Science, after which this area became a thing, essentially. And then the authoring of this book called Computational Social Science, Discovery and Prediction by Michael Alvarez, is really the foundational text, foundational book of all of the methods that we discuss as social data science and computational social science. So early foundations of computational social science and social data science would be early 1990s, when we have internet accessibility increasing. We have earlier examples of smartphones proliferating. And then in 2000s, we have the emergence of new methods through the integration of sociology, economics, and computer science. And gradually, we see the establishment of hybrid research centers like the Santa Fe Institute, the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard, Media Lab at MIT, who become this driving force of these new hybrid methods. Even before those, we have influential foundational, grandfather of the field sort of works. Joshua Epstein and Robert Axtell's Growing Artificial Societies, Networked Crowds and Markets, Complex Adaptive Systems, who create the epistemological basis of what we do as computational social science. And they either adopt a network science point of view, or they adapt agent-based models or game theoretical approaches in order to understand human dynamics in digital space. In the second wave, beginning with 2015 onwards, we start to see increasingly more wearable devices, more sensors deployed in traffic spaces, in municipality areas. Everyone starts to have these Apple Watches. Everyone starts to check in their status on Spotify, on Facebook. And with this renaissance in wearable devices, Internet of Things, we gradually see an integration of machine learning algorithms for the modeling of consumer behavior, urban modeling, defense planning, and especially forecasting becomes a thing, because forecasting is essentially statistics, and statistics that try to optimize something in the future based on the likelihood of that same event taking place in the past. So in order to improve prediction capacity, we start to get real-time data analytics, tracking rapid environments such as migration, political crises, protest movements, terrorist attacks. During COVID pandemic, this real-time data analytics became a huge innovation, and public health data started to merge with computational social science methods. During that part, we have, really from the network perspective, the earlier 1980s work of Robert Axelrod, The Complexity of Cooperation, Agent-Based Models of Competition and Collaboration, that gets cited quite a lot. But also its modern equivalent, Laszlo Barabashi's How Everything is Connected to Everything Else and What It Means for Business, Science, and Everyday Life. That linked book starts to become the dominating book of this new phase of computational social science. And in many ways, initially the methods go into three primary areas. One goes through the pathway of network and complexity to study social structures, from the role of family ties to political affiliation, echo chambers in social media, polarization in digital media settings. The second trajectory is text, which is large language models, natural language processing, essentially words. As we start to deal with more and more words, text data starts to explode, especially through Twitter. And with that innovation, we start to get the inclusion of linguistics, especially computational linguistics, in the mix. And with the private satellite data revolution, which private entities start to increase the number of satellite orbiting the Earth, satellite imagery data starts to get more readily available for researchers. And that becomes an additional layer in which we can look at two-dimensional readings of urban development, environmental change, and conflict zones, for example. And through this period, we have networked prediction becoming a huge issue. Complex contagions and the weakness of long ties is one big article in this field. Identifying influential and susceptible members of social media networks, Sinan Eral and Dylan Walker. Here, the network origins of large economic turntowns, Acemoğlu and others are more important fields in this period. Now, our field is gravitating towards three new frontiers. One, predictive analysis. Right now, everyone is interested in some kind of human prediction and forecasting. Most computational social science projects are on predictive analysis, either for private or government-funded projects. Analytical speed and size are becoming even more and more vast. We have larger social media data. We have more sensors around the world. Administrative records become digitized, become easily accessible. We have the emergence of what we call multimodal data. Instead of text, we now have text combined with image data combined with network data combined with geospatial data. We have human-computer interaction. We have computer vision. So we start to get richer, multifaceted insights into social behavior. Sorry, what? Oh. So based on that, we have some theoretical advances. So social dynamics are changing significantly. We increasingly have more virtual communities appearing online, especially teens are, young people are being socialized in digital spaces, perhaps more than they do in physical spaces. You have the rise of digital congregations, digital church networks, digital synagogue networks, digital mosque networks, where people are basically carrying out their religious practices, religious togetherness feelings in digital spaces as well. The governments are increasingly interested in peeking into this new source of data about their populations. That leads to the techno-surveillance complex. There was this very interesting Foreign Affairs article a few years back called The End of Secrecy or End of Secrets, how data availability is preventing governments from keeping anything secret, because the open source intelligence community, OSINT community, all of those Bellingcats, whatnot, they right now can have access to formally sensitive information through open source methods. And we have micro-targeting of human beings, and the Cambridge Analytica scandal, as you would know, was one of the biggest problematic indicators of this new trend. Today, we have multiple Cambridge Analyticas, multiple corporations who do largely the same thing that Cambridge Analytica did in 2016. It's just that we don't hear about them that much anymore. And maybe today, three of the most influential books on these issues would be The Platform Society, and then Shoshana Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, and The Custodians of the Internet, specifically how digital power dynamics are shaping society. I'd like to go a little bit further. Actually, no, let's stay here. But the more we deal with these new kinds of data, we have, of course, concerns about bias, ethics, and privacy. If you were to apply to a large grant, for example, like ERC, like Horizon Europe, you'd be asked to complete extensive ethics documentation in order to be able to get the funding. The one big problem is if you're doing algorithmic work, there are always biases in algorithms, and you need a pathway, a strategy to develop in your own research, fairness metrics, and auditing algorithms. You need to comply with privacy and data governance protocols such as the GDPR when doing research on these things. And of course, there are a lot of impacts on human test subjects, and both direct impact on human test subjects if you're directly getting data from them, but also unintended consequences of this kind of work on human test subjects, especially if you're doing computational work on vulnerable populations such as migrants, refugees. If you are doing crisis analytics, for example, during an earthquake or a flood, your research has direct impacts on people in disaster areas. Same goes for war and conflict. If you're using social media data from a conflict zone, and if you do not anonymize your data properly, it has a chance of creating backlash to those civilians in conflict settings. Things we need to be increasingly more cautious about. And because the field is developing so fast, sometimes even ethics advisory boards don't have a simple answer on how to deal with these problems. So every solution you come up with is tailored to the project that you're doing on your own. Now, I would say the field is progressing in three distinct trajectories. One, generative AI. Generative AI in computational social science relates to automating content generation and, for example, improving narrative analysis using GPT models to simulate political discourse. So we increasingly have more skilled use of AI in international relations and political debates. So there's one line of research that deals with automated recognition and identification of generative AI, but also the use of generative AI in political discourse and public discourse, and especially diplomatic communication. Ukraine, for example, has meme forces, which allows them to use mimetic warfare in order to steer public opinion using generative AI, for example. There are other countries who are using generative AI during diplomatic crises, during escalation periods, for which we need a framework to analyze them. We have a second line of research in this sense, going towards computational ethnography and AI-driven digital humanities, because there are a lot of online dynamics that cannot be analyzed through quantitative methods. So we need a way of studying culture and symbols and meaning in digital space using computational tools. For example, tracking a meme culture's evolution and its societal impacts. For example, what sort of a research framework do we have? We don't have. In terms of understanding how 9gag, for example, 9gag's meme culture is affecting public opinion on countries, public opinion on diplomatic escalations. The third line of research is decolonizing this line of research, because it's essentially very Western centric, and it's a very white, in a way, research area. How do we promote methodologies and perspective from the global south, for example? And how do we make this more inclusive, both in terms of how we use the data, but also in terms of generating knowledge and meaning out of this? So there's definitely an agenda on colonizing CSS research to a great extent. So there are quite interesting and impressive new works on emerging abilities of large language models and their impacts on law, politics, and diplomacy. There's a very recent, last year's very interesting work by Sandra Water, Brent Mittelstadt, and Chris Russell from the Oxford Internet Institute. Do large language models have a legal duty to tell the truth, which is a very important work that also has significant implications on the use of large language models in international organizations, in foreign ministries, which most foreign ministries now use large language models, and during diplomatic negotiation procedures. Can generative AI improve social science, which was another very important work last year by Chris Bale, who's one of the pioneers of this field. So that is essentially some of the newer works on the field. And cultural analytics, Lev Manovich, a very important book. Computation and the humanities, extremely important. Computational humanities research. Gradually, these books are expanding this work from social sciences more towards the humanities and more towards cultural studies, which I'm sure is going to be very important for international relations. Now, in terms of the actual practical implications of all of these, theoretical big picture discussion, one work that I'd like to present is a forthcoming article we have with two of my colleagues from University College London. We are interested in micro level modeling of civil war and conflict. Most of you would know, even though Syria recently stabilized, for years it was subjected to a civil war. And we were interested, both from Syria or Iraq or different civil war dynamics from around the world. We had this question of, is there a generalized model of violence in civil war? One of the biggest figures in political violence research studies, Kalivas, who wrote the Strategic Logic of Violence book a couple of decades ago, which became huge in the field. But we were interested in basically creating a model of tit-for-tat behavior, such as why do non-state armed groups attack where they attacked? Why do those groups defend where they defend? What best explains conflict and non-violence dynamics among belligerent groups? What explains the causes of territorial shifts between rebel groups? So we were interested in using computational data, a combination of curated data together with social media data we extracted through our own methods, largely by extracting Twitter data, cleaning that Twitter data, and formatting that Twitter data in such a way from the war zone so that we could do some kind of conflict mapping. And basically, we wanted to enhance our understanding of conflict dynamics. We wanted to use computational and mathematical modeling by creating an agent-based model informed by empirical Twitter data. And we focused on the Kurdish-ISIS conflict in specifically Rojava, Syria, through January 2017 to 2019, because that part of the Syrian civil war was the most dense in terms of the strategic interactions and the number of fights, if you will, between the two sides. So for those of you who don't know the Syrian civil war, the conflict in Rojava was the most intense fighting phase of the conflict. And we wanted to focus specifically on that. And of course, from a literature review point of view, the systematic study of microdynamics of the conflict is relatively new. Usually conflict was being studied in macro level. There were a lot of low interaction cases that studied microdynamics. So there was a difficulty in generating high interaction cases. And either those who focused on high interaction models usually focus on a single agent rather than a dyadic interaction between two models. So we got inspired quite a lot, as I mentioned, from Stathis Kariva's work, The Logic of Violence in Civil War, Layava says, Rivalry and Revenge, and Jürgen Branch, Killing Civilians in Civil War, three key books that are very important for this field. So what we did is we used three different types of data to cross-validate. One was Uppsala Conflict Data Program and Peace Research Institute of Oslo, the UCDP PRIO data. The second line of data was Armed Conflict Location and Event Dataset. The third line of data was Integrated Conflict Early Warning System, or IQS data. And the fourth was Twitter data that we generated our own from social media data, because in social media data, you can get a lot of tweets from conflict zones, and those conflict zones from conflict data from conflict zones, you can then clean and using text-based methods, you can do redundancy checks and use as conflict data. We use Twitter because it is very comprehensive. Most conflict events through 2017 and 2019 took place on Twitter. It wasn't really covered much on Facebook. You would have insufficient data from Instagram. TikTok wasn't really a thing during that time. So Twitter was the best the best source of data around that time. So we had a prior study with my co-author, me and Ahmet Kurnaz. We did conflict and forced migration, social media as event data, which was a chapter in a book called Data Science for Migration and Mobility. So we use the data that we generated from a previous project. For some reason, my screen just like squeezed, so there are some overlaps. The biggest problem with this kind of computational social science work is that there are data bias problems, and the biggest data bias problems related to these guys that I have here called cell phone towers. Political nature of events always introduce bias, but the biggest problem is in a conflict region, these cell phone towers get destroyed quite a lot. These cell phone towers are very fragile. So whenever there's a bombing, whenever there's a fighting between these two groups, the first thing that gets destroyed are those cell phone towers. So you need a mitigation strategy. You have to use non-governmental and varied sources to reduce bias. And you also have to do cross-check and cross-validation, which is why we are using 4 different layers of data: UCDP PRIO, ACLED, IQs, and Twitter data. Especially for smaller scale ISIS attacks, you need to do some kind of cross-validation. Now, we have used, for those of you who know game theoretical models, we use iterated prisoner's dilemma and hawk-doe game as a model of basic interaction. But on Python, we also picked quite a large number of different game theoretical models who have their own utility and limitations when you are working on a project with two dyads, basically. And models, they model the decision-making processes of ISIS and Kurdish militias, where we interpret their strategic interactions through cooperation and defection dynamics. Defection and cooperation in game theory largely correspond to violent actions and non-violent actions. So the decision to attack somewhere or another party versus decision to not attack another party. So we are basically modeling those strategic interactions across hundreds and thousands of attack, not attack, attack, not attack, attack, not attack dimension. So we also used simulated interactions using games like Tit for Tat or Alternator, which both one-dimensional game theoretical model, which explains how one group makes that decision, versus a dyadic game theoretical interaction setting, which allowed us to match conflict data with actual conflict events in the field. Sorry, what? Oh, okay. So basically, at the end of the day, we had an enormous amount of data as a result of this, which really qualified this project as a big data project. So we separated between locations below 50 plus events, below 50 events, and locations above 50 plus events. These events constitute attacking, bombing, drone strike, suicide attack, kidnapping, intimidation. So all of these action types we models, and we observed that the interaction patterns varied with theoretical. When a territory was exchanged between the Kurdish militias and ISIS militias, we observed a very large peak in interactions just before territorial shift and after the territorial shift. So we started to build our model based on the probability of defection by Kurdish forces and ISIS forces at given time, month 1, month 2, month 3, and strategies employed by player A and player B. These change from always defects to tit-for-tat behavior, the geographic factor, the temporal factor, and at each specific round, we build a model that predicts the ability of one side to challenge the other, and the other side resisting or not resisting. And so we gradually built our game theoretical models based on simulating Kurdish, ISIS, violent and non-violent interactions. As a result of which, long story short, we found that the proportion of attacks by each side identified as a key indicator of significant changes in the conflict, revealing one-sided violence as prevalent with minimal immediate retaliation. We then observed that one-sided violence, especially violence against civilians, was a very big indicator of rebel group success. This is a very morbid, very dark, and very unfortunate finding that we have, but very unfortunately, the group that controls the death of civilians, either in the sense of large-scale massacres or refraining from doing large-scale massacres, was the most successful group in terms of gaining the most territory. And that is a very unfortunate finding, but it largely supports Stathis Kaliva's findings all the way from mid-2000s in his book on strategic logic of violence in civil war. Then at the end of the day, the proportion of attacks carried out by each side, we found, is a better indicator of significant changes in the conflict than specific patterns of strategic interaction, which means that those who attack win more than those who defend, which is a very interesting finding. A large majority of the model behavior is made up of periods of one-sided violence where retaliation by the opposing side, if present, is not immediate. So sides fight in bursts. Usually you have a very low level of intensity, then you have a big peak, big fight, and then you also have a long duration of low intensity. And finally, change in control of a certain location are preceded by outbursts of one-sided violence of varying intensity, which rarely garner retaliation, especially in this setting. We had some questions for our next project, but the final project that I'd like to go over is this recent work that we did with my co-author Tuba Bircan from VUB in Brussels. We were interested in the fact that these like computational tools, computational methods, they are becoming more and more popular. So I'm a conflict scholar. Professor Bircan is a migration scholar. We both work on AI and AI generated prediction. So we asked this question, can AI predict migration through conflict event datasets? So can we say, for example, that if we have a lot of conflict events in a place, under what conditions does that conflict intensity lead to migration, meaning people leaving that area? I specialized in conflict event datasets. Professor Bircan specialized in migration event datasets. So we said, let's combine them together and then do a benchmarking study of various forecasting methods to see which AI forecasting method is best suited to predict migration through violent events. So that, let's say from the position of European Union, for example, what is the threshold or what is the numerical condition for, let's say, a border agency in the EU to look at a conflict and say that, okay, so migration is going to happen from this place. So that's what the project is about. So usually violent conflicts drive forced migration by damaging infrastructure, displacing populations, and triggering resource shortages. The decision to flee or stay, that is not automatic. It's not like whenever there's conflict, people just leave the area. This, for example, in Yemen, a group of Ethiopian refugees, it's a very interesting photo. It's a very special photo as well for many unfortunate reasons. But usually communities don't automatically run away from a conflict region. Sometimes they stay. So under certain conditions, migrant groups can also choose to stay in a conflict area. Sometimes they may think that conflict is maybe short-lived, maybe they might feel like they can survive. So not all of them actually leave. I'm really sorry for this like jumbled text title. There's a reason. I think when I switch to presentation mode, that my screen just compressed this text so the titles don't really show. But the gap in the literature basically showed us that conflict and migration causality is not automatic. Sometimes it causes displacement by damaging infrastructure and disrupting access to vital resources. Until then, if that happens, people leave. Mowafi, for example, in 2011 work, argues that only if conflict-induced displacement exacerbate existing health crisis, then they leave. Edward Lee in 1966 is a very old article, but it's a very important article. He introduced this concept of push-pull framework. So under what conditions do the migrants who leave a conflict area then return back to it? Sandberg and Melander have this very interesting and important UCDP georeference event data set, which we use very frequently in this line of research. And there are also a lot of new works on climate, conflict, and forced migration. Does climate change generate conflict, and does that conflict lead to migration? Or does climate change lead to migration and that leads to conflict? So this causality work is still very much in the works in the literature. But we were interested in exploring this causality work from an estimation and prediction work. So in order to be able to say that conflict leads to migration, you need to actually control for a very large menu of intervening variables, such as discrimination, persecution, land productivity, habitability. So for example, if a conflict area has very productive soil, most refugees do not flee that area hoping to do farming in that region one day when the conflict subsides. So we wanted to really dig deep into this dynamic, and we wanted to focus on two specific large casualty events which take place in between civil war dynamics. So in both Somalia and Yemen cases, you have a setting of low intensity conflict, then an enormous casualty terrorist attack with large casualties, and then once again, low intensity conflict. So these two cases were picked because they had the highest likelihood of causing displacement, and they were also the hardest to predict, because even though they happened in civil war settings, they were very black swan events. They were very difficult to forecast. One is October 2017. The other one is October 2016. And here we use both standard conflict data from ACLED, but we also used the social media data that we generated from a prior project. So we used ACLED and social media data, and displacement data came from UNHCR Protection and Return Monitoring Network from Somalia, International Displaced Monitoring Center, Displaced People Monitoring Center for Yemen. And then when you say AI-based forecasting, we are essentially talking about four of the most popular primary machine learning models: random forest, support vector machines, XGBoost, and neural networks. And we did a lot of data cleaning, feature engineering, and temporal alignment between conflict events and displacement data. So formatting and cleaning this data took quite a while. And basically, long story short, different machine learning models gave us different types of success. So random forest was good in terms of handling missing values well and dealing with noisy data, but it's underestimated extreme events. So it was the worst in terms of predicting these bombings and the subsequent migration. Support vector machine model was good in performing with imbalanced data sets, because Yemen case has bigger data compared to the Somalia data. So when you have these two instances with unequal event sizes, support vector machines are very good, but they also struggle with extreme events and outliers, especially high fatality incidents. XGBoost also is very efficient, but it is prone to overfitting, which we don't really want. But at the end of the day, with this kind of black swan unexpected events, neural networks ended up becoming the most successful, but they were also prone to overfitting in that regard. So just these are the performance metrics. Generally, neural network did better with Yemen, and random forest did better with Somalia. The next paper that we want to create from this project is to combine these machine learning methods with more cases to see under what conditions exactly do these different machine learning models perform well. So right now we know why random forest does better with Somalia, because it follows a clear trajectory to this extreme event. Whereas in Yemen, it didn't do well because it is really a black swan event. You can't really predict the Yemen bombings, and their neural networks end up predicting both the bombing and the migration that happened afterwards really, really well. And in terms of the observed fatalities and predicted fatalities, at least, in Yemen, this this XGBoost performs closest to the actual number, whereas for Somalia, neural network performs much better. So one has lowest error in typical events, but fails to capture extreme cases. The other one closest to actual fatalities, but highly variable. XGBoost has balanced performance, best for cumulative events such as Yemen, random forest underestimate. So the next thing that we're going to do out of this project is to do this correlation dyadic work where we compare observed fatalities and predicted fatalities, observed migration and predicted migration, using a dyadic framework as well, with each event, whether one event can predict other follow-up events or not. So yeah, basically, I would like to conclude by maybe focusing on three of the areas in which I'd like to discuss further, maybe discuss, also infer, our Q&A as well. One thing that I'd like to say is that for a very long time, computational social science or social data science, they were considered to be just a passing fad, just a temporary excitement. I'd say that no, they are now very well established. There's a journal called Journal of Computational Social Science. Most good universities have computational social science masters and PhD programs. And the amount of PhD theses from good universities being written on this is just enormous. So its name might change. So instead of computational social science, somebody might call it something else in the future. But this social study of digital human behavior is definitely here to stay. It's not going anywhere. So if we have any emerging scholars or just PhDs and master's students in the field, if you are going into computational social science, it is really a long-term thing. It's going to be here for a very long time. I think the interesting kind of thesis writing topic, next frontier perhaps on this, is the role of generative AI in computational social science, because we still don't have enough works on how AI itself is changing human interaction in digital spaces, and also how AI in digital spaces are changing physical human behavior in the real world. And the role of social sciences in computational social science is very much understudied. People are so interested in these new methods, shiny maps, colorful graphs, that most social scientists, when they learn the coding component of this, they forget social theory. And I think that's a big mistake. We have to learn and grasp our social theory, social sciences formation even more, so that we can collaborate with computer scientists and computer engineers who don't really have that social theory or social sciences training. And I think that's it from me. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts and questions on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Akın, for introducing us to the state of the art concerning computational analysis, and for sharing insights for your own work, very interesting work. Let's open the floor to questions. We already have a question on the chat. Please use the raise your hand button if you want to ask a question, and make sure you mute your mic after asking the question. I'm going to read the question from the chat to kickstart the Q&A part. It's from Deden, and the question is, as traditional quantitative methods, statistics, do compute as well, like correlates of war, is there any clear difference that makes research as computational research rather than quantitative like the old days?
Yes. Welcome to the biggest fight in computational social science. That's a very valid question. That's also a very good question. So the biggest separation of what makes something computational, and on this, a very specific description is made in Matt Salganik's book called Bit by Bit, Computational Research in Digital Age, social research in digital age. So that Bit by Bit book by Matt Salganik from Princeton University has a chapter on what differentiates computational from quantitative. And the biggest separator, if you will, is that just like you said, data sets like correlates of war, UCDP, PRIO, ACLED, these are quantitative data sets, whereas computational social science looks at digital human footprint, either on websites or social media or wearable devices, so on and so forth. So if you are dealing with fluid human digital footprint, it is a computational data. If you're using World Development Indicators, United States refugee data, or correlates of war, it's a statistical analysis. So it is really about whether we are exploring human behavior online versus other things. So correlates of war doesn't deal with human behavior online. So it's our classical statistical methods. But if you are extracting large-scale Twitter data from a protest and doing text mining on that Twitter data, it is very much a computational tool. If you are scraping, for example, Spotify music selection behavior in Istanbul, for example, where I am, during religious festivals, for example, it gives you a sense of what percentage of a city is religious versus not religious that much using Spotify music behavior. So that is very much a computational research. If I didn't present it, but one of my projects a few years back was I was interested in selfies from war zones. In war zones, militants, fighters, and terrorists sometimes would take selfies and post online. So what I did a few years back was that I scraped those selfies and I started to look at the temporal patterns, the timing of those selfies. And I observed that when militants posted too many selfies on social media from the same location in northern Syria and in northern Iraq, that was usually before they would go into war, into an actual conflict. This was before they would attack somewhere. So they're taking their selfies as a last memory, if you will. So I did some statistical analysis between selfies I scraped from Instagram uh, and matched them with ACLED data, for example. I found a very high significance in between selfies being taken and then violent acts from that same region. So it was a very good predictor of violent activity. So because I was scraping selfies from Instagram, I was essentially working with digital human footprint, which made that research computational rather than just statistical. As long as we're dealing with online human interactions and online human data, either from social media or websites or digital communication tools like WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, for example, or wearable devices like Google Maps data or wearable device data, we are doing computational work, and that's very different from correlates of war data, which is standard, typical, old school quantitative.
Thank you, Akın. There is one question on the chat and one by Sibel. Let's give the floor to Sibel first.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. I wonder how you decided which ML algorithm is fit for your research, because I saw in your presentation you picked some of them, just four: SVM, neural network, XGBoost, and random forests. And as you know, there are many ML algorithms, and I wonder that you tried the methods before the analysis or use the literature to choose fine methods for your project. Thank you.
Thank you. Second one. So we did a literature review first, and then we looked at what are the most frequently used methods. And we were skeptical. We were skeptical in the sense that these weren't even the best or most suitable algorithms to do prediction. But for some reason, they were the most popular in the literature. So we started our first paper by using the most popular methods in the literature so that we could do a benchmarking study so that we could say these are bad, or these are bad for this reason, or these are mixed success. So I think next up, we want to increase the size of events, but also diversify the number of machine learning algorithms. So this was very much a first pilot study based on the trends in the literature, which gave us kind of like a radar sense of why people are using these methods. And in our pilot study, we realized that these algorithms aren't even the most appropriate to study conflict and migration. So we are going to expand our list of algorithms, or even generate a specific algorithm for this purpose. So it was the second option you mentioned. We picked them by looking at the literature, which studies are using for conflict prediction, migration prediction extensively.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Akın, and thank you, Sibel, for your questions. There are more questions on the chat. So one from Eugene. What publicly accessible data sources would you recommend for someone beginning to practice with these methods? And if I'm allowed, I would want to follow up on this question. I'm wondering what kind of background does someone need to start with this kind of methodology? You presented some LLMs which might are common to the insiders, but what about the outsiders who want to adopt this kind of methodology?
Yeah, I'm an outsider, so I come from
No, you're
discourse.
not.
I come from discourse analysis. I come from a background of archival work and discourse analysis, like very classical, ideology and discourse analysis. I come from a very qualitative background. My dissertation was qualitative up until 2015. I was a purely qualitative person who was just simply afraid of statistics, and I thought that I was extremely incapable of understanding mathematics in general. So the reason why I kind of transitioned this was out of necessity. I was working on conflict and violence, and it was incredibly difficult to do field work in Syria or Iraq around the time of 2015. So because all of my options to do qualitative work on conflict were gone, I just like gradually transitioned into doing manual qualitative social media analysis. And then one day, one of my computer scientist friends said, "Oh, poor you, you're trying to manually research all of this social media stuff yourself by hand. You know, we have extensive tools for this, right?" And then, at that time, we had like very little books, or this wasn't even a thing in 2015, to be honest. It's not that old, like it's just 10 years ago, but none of this was around 10 years ago. So I'd like briefly just taught myself how to do this. But today, what publicly accessible data sources, up until Elon Musk became the head of Twitter, I would have said just do Twitter data, because it was freely available, it was accessible with just like a free researcher API. API means your permission to access the data from that website. It was perfect. Everything ran very well. Twitter data was the best way of learning computational social science, and the documentation, the coding, and whatever, it was just very, very good. Now we can't even get proper access to Twitter, even if you paid for data. Elon Musk was a disaster for the computational social science community. So today, there are several ways of starting with this. I suggest some of my students who want to transition to this. One, the Tableau community is really, really good. Tableau is a website, and they have this data repository freely available for people who want to start with both quantitative, statistical, and computational analysis. But I would say for graduate students and early career assistant professors, the best place to start would be Summer Institute in Computational Social Science.io. So Summer Institute in Computational Social Science is the flagship summer school for computational social science. It was started at Duke University, then Princeton and Duke universities, and then it spread into the United States and spread into Europe, and then the rest of the world. I have been running the Turkey leg of this Summer Institute in Computational Social Science since 2018 for 7 years, and we have the best most friendly group of people around the world who just want to help each other. Summer Institute in Computational Social Science website both contains information about whether there is a summer school close to your location. The applications are over for this year. It starts in October for next year. But there, in Summer Institute in Computational Social Science, we have a section called Learn, which takes a person who has no prior experience with those things, and then using freely available data sets, publicly accessible data, it basically builds your skill as a computational social scientist. If you want to do computational social science or data science, usually you have two programming languages to go through. You either become a Python person, start learning Python and do these things with Python, or if you want to combine computation with statistics more, you take the R pathway, just R, the letter R. There are very similar programming languages. People usually become an R person or Python person as if they're supporting a football team. That's very unnecessary. I think it is, I mean, I tell my students to learn both because both platforms can be useful for you depending on your research question. But this Summer Institute's in Computational Social Science website is the answer to your question. Where should we start? You should start at Summer Institute in Computational Social Science website.
Thank you, Akın. There's one more question on platforms, and precisely Julian asks, how did the scrapping of Instagram data abide with Meta's term of service?
In 2016, they did not have any terms of service. I did this work in 2016. Scraping was not just okay. Instagram was sponsoring scraping studies itself for brand management and corporate identity projects. So back when I did this, Instagram was actively suggesting people to use scraping because back then their API worked really, really bad. So they instead did this a lot of, especially selfie scraping funded projects. Like, can you automatically detect the brand from a hat, for example? So back when I did this, which was like 2015, 2016, it didn't have terms of service. Or it did have terms of service, but it was very elementary. It didn't really cover scraping rules at all.
Yep, and as I understand, one more thing with this kind of research is that the terms of use are constantly changing. So you can start a project and maybe some data are available, but then you don't have the data. Am I correct?
Yeah, yeah. At the time of you accessing the data, if the terms of services say that you can access that data that way, you can use that data for scientific work. So maybe a month later, terms of service may change, but it doesn't matter. You collected the data a month ago, so the rules of 1 month ago apply. Of course, you have to stop collecting data if the terms of service change and say that you can no longer collect data that way. So one example is that in Twitter's terms of service before Elon Musk, scraping was not allowed. But then they had a wonderful API which you could get freely, so that you could legally get sufficient amount of data for research point of view. You never even needed scraping. But after Elon Musk came to power, he restricted and just like messed up the API completely. But then he also removed scraping as an illegal thing to do. So silently, it's his way of saying that I don't want to deal with API. If you just want to scrape, I'm not going to stop you. So these things change so fast that usually when we are doing computational social science or social data science, meaning that we are dealing with digital data from platforms, from communication services, we always have to keep an eye on both terms of services changing, but also legal frameworks like the GDPR or the EU AI Act being amended and updated so that you don't do anything wrong, so to speak.
One more question from Susanna. How can AI help in determining causality between two data points? For example, did the exacerbated actions against civilians cause the success of an armed group in taking a geographical area, or did the success of the armed group cause an exacerbation of actions against civilians?
Yeah. The chicken and egg problem that we are always dealing with. What we did is that we fed 4 different algorithms a ton of civil war events from ACLED and a ton of migration events from the United Nations migration database. Then we excluded in calibration the Yemen and Sana'a bombings, 2 of the most difficult terrorist attacks to predict, and then using prior knowledge of conflict and event, and there were like tens of thousands of data points. I think I missed that part in my presentation, but we first taught all 4 algorithms the interaction between a terrorist attack, a bombing, a large casualty conflict event, and the resultant migration. And then we expected those 4 algorithms retrospectively, starting from 2 months prior to the bombings, to see if they, one, can catch the bombing event, they can predict the conflict event successfully, and can they predict the migration event that happened afterwards. So all 4 models are pre-trained based on both ACLED's violent conflict data, which is thousands and thousands of data points, and UN migration data, which is hundreds and hundreds of data points. So these 4 algorithms are pre-trained models that are retrospectively trying to predict an event we then purposefully omitted from the conflict trajectory. So it is basically number of casualties in a geographical area, and the United Nations logs migration events in terms of source destination and the target destination, from where have they originated to where they have gone and what were their numbers. Using that data, we basically try to get 4 algorithms to predict something retrospectively, if that answers the question.
And one last question from Kuma. How can we make sure publicly available digital data is not AI created?
Publicly, so that's the biggest problem. Publicly available data is so difficult to find nowadays. Meta is completely restrictive about it. TikTok has an API, it doesn't work well. Twitter, Elon Musk happened. The free API doesn't give you much data. The paid API service is just too expensive. But even then, it sometimes have these like large gaps in the data that you pull, so it doesn't give you proper data. So publicly available digital data, you can do pre-curated data sets from Tableau, for example, or from the Summer Institute in Computational Social Science website that we have. There are some publicly available training data. But nowadays, I think publicly available social media data that is not AI generated is usually the data that you get from the social media service itself using its API. But in any kind of interaction, if you mean that's not AI created, for example, there's a lot of bot activity around elections. So if you're a political scientist working on elections, you want to explore polarization dynamics on Twitter, for example, you would be dealing with a lot of bot accounts, which in practice is AI generated. So if the question is AI generated in the sense that it is a bot account, then it is part of the discussion. We accept it as part of the discussion. If a public API, public digital data being created by an AI agent, then the best way to circumvent that is by using Tableau, its curated data sets, or using the APIs of social media platforms themselves. The question is a bit confusing for me because an AI can generate digital data in multiple ways. Maybe I didn't understand the question correctly, but that's basically how you go about it.
Thank you so much, Akın. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today, all the participants and especially those who posed questions. I'm grateful to Akın for accepting our invitation and for introducing us to computational analysis. Stay tuned. We will have more online events soon. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much.